Hello, and welcome to this live podcast recording of the now award-winning podcast, How I Found My Voice Live. I'm Samira Ahmed, and I go behind the celebrity persona to find out what influences shaped their success. How did writers, politicians, and performers grow up to become such great and unique communicators? And my guest today is one of America's greatest communicators and greatest musical stars. Gloria Estefan was born in Cuba just before the revolution that brought Fidel Castro to power, but her family had to flee as exiles and brought her to Florida at the age of 2, where she's lived ever since. She formed the Miami Sound Machine with her husband Emilio, and their crossover pop hits such as Rhythm Is Gonna Get You, Dr. Beat, and Get On Your Feet has made them stadium-filling, chart-topping superstars, first in Latin America, then in the US and across the world. She sold 100 million albums, being a 7-time Grammy winner and a Hollywood actor. But at the peak of her fame in 1990, she nearly died in a crash that was expected to leave her paralyzed. It didn't. Her life has inspired a Tony-nominated stage musical, Get On Your Feet, that's also traveled around the world. And her latest album sees her combine the rhythms of Brazilian music with reworkings of some of her classic pop hits. And for the recording purposes, I can see Gloria speaking to me from your beautiful home in Miami with your American flag and surrounded by photographs of your family. Welcome.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Samira. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Yes, behind me you have my American flag. You also have the flag that draped my father's casket. He was a military man, served both in Bay of Pigs in Cuba under the failed invasion, Bay of Pigs invasion, and then later joined the U.S. Army. And that was the flag that they gave me the day he passed away. So yeah, you have pictures of a lifetime there. And above that, there's albums from a lifetime of my work and family. I haven't even looked through a lot of those, but I'm really thrilled to be here and share this time with you.
Fantastic. And we're going to talk a lot more about your family and your life story. A welcome to everyone in our virtual audience joining us from around the world. We would love you to be part of this conversation. So just so you know, I'll be in conversation with Gloria for about 45 minutes or so. And then we'll be taking your questions. So you can start sending them in now and at any time during the next hour. Just click on the Q&A button, which is under the video screen. You can just type in your question, press send, and we'll start going through them. So just remember, anytime, please do that. So Gloria, I always want to take my guests back to the start. You were born, you have a long name, but the first 3 names, Gloria Maria Milagrosa, in 1957 in Cuba. Milagrosa, the miraculous one. Did you feel special?
I don't know if special is the word, but ever since I have a memory, I remember thinking first that I was really old for some reason. I felt like I had been around. And I also felt that one day I might do something very different. I didn't know what it was or how it would come about. But I did have a feeling that there was something in my future that was not going to be, you know, this more the same. It was going to be a unique thing. I had no clue what. But I sing since I talk. That came with me. That yeah, that maybe because I do have very strong genetic musical genes on both sides. On my dad's side, we had a classical pianist, a classical violinist, a flautist that had his own band, famous in Cuba, Fajardo and his All-Stars, Fajardo y sus Estrellas, who later, when he emigrated to New York, also made it big with his band there. Both my uncles, my father's brothers, sang. My grandmother wrote poetry. My father was a military guy. He was the one that didn't venture into. I bet he probably could have sung if he wanted to. And then my mother won a contest to be Shirley Temple's double as a child. She was her same age.
Wow.
She had the curls, and they had a worldwide contest to find a Spanish-speaking Shirley Temple so that they could take her to Hollywood and she would serve as a stand-in for Shirley Temple and a lot of the contract players of the day, like Deanna Durbin and other Jane Wyman, and she won. But when they told my grandfather that one of them, him or my grandmother, had to give up the rights to their child because they didn't want to sign a contract and then have a divorce happen and have the child become a pawn. He put his foot down and told my grandmother, absolutely not. She's not going anywhere. So to me, my mother was always the diva of the family. She walked into a room and you knew she was there. She was always telling jokes. She would break into song. And the only way she could get my diaper on, she claimed, was to sing to me. I would melt. I would completely melt and become, like, stare at her and like hypnotized. And when I started talking, I started singing. It came with me. I would emulate whatever. In Cuba, they literally had to pull me off the sidewalk because somehow from hearing on the radio and on TV, I learned the revolutionary anthem that the Castro regime was putting out there. And my father was in jail for being a police officer. And the night of the presidential palace when the coup happened, he got arrested along with his father, who was a commander in the armed forces. So imagine I'm there in this singing this anthem, and my mother saying, "You can't sing, I come inside." But I just had an amazing memory for music, and it started really early.
Can I ask a bit more about your father? What was his story? He was in jail already when you were very, very young.
Yes, because what happened was my father wanted to be in the army. He was a military guy. He loved it. And he had filled an application to join the army. When my grandfather saw his application, he ripped it up and threw it away and never told my dad because he didn't want to be accused of nepotism with a son joining the army. So when my father asked my grandfather, "Hey, what's happening? I haven't got my application back. I applied." He goes, "No, I ripped it up. I don't want you to be in the army. They're going to accuse me then of having favoritism." So then my father did the next best thing. He became a police officer in the motorcycle police force and got a reputation for being an incredibly moral man. He would not accept anything, even an apple or a box of cigarettes, a pack of cigarettes from anyone. And then the first lady found out, plus he was I gotta say, my dad was a gorgeous man. He was beautiful. And they handpicked the first lady's motorcycle escort, and he was one of them. So wherever the first lady, Batista's first lady, went, my dad had to be there because he was in the motorcade, heading the motorcade. And the night that the coup happened, 58 to 59, he was at the presidential palace because there was a giant party, New Year's Eve party going on. And he was there in the detail for the first lady. So he came home. My mother said he was pale as a sheet, sweating profusely, and locked himself in the bathroom and told my mother, she knocked on the door, "What's happening? What's happening?" And he said, "We are in real trouble. The president just left the country. I just left him and the first lady at the airport, and this is going to get really bad." And she said, "Don't go back." And he goes, "I have to go back. I'm a police officer for this city. All hell's breaking loose." And he went back. And she told him, "They're going to jail you." And he goes, "I have to go back, whether or not they jail me." And yes, they jailed him and his father, and then released him 3 months later because they jailed his father for nepotism because they were trumping up charges. And of course, there was no proof of anything, and they hadn't done anything. So they had to release him 3 months later, which is when he...
in Florida by then?
No, we were still in Cuba. My mother took me to visit my father in jail, and one of the top three, it was Fidel Castro, Camilo Cienfuegos, and Che Guevara were kind of the three heads of the revolution. And Camilo Cienfuegos was at the prison that day, and I was in line with my mom. And of course, like a child, I'm thirsty, and my mother's trying to shut me up. And Camilo Cienfuegos comes and grabs a little tin cup from the wall and fills it with water and hands it to me. And my mom didn't want me to drink that. God knows what germs were on that. And when she said, no, thank you. And he says, "What, this isn't good enough for you, whatever." And he made me drink it. And I got a huge infection in my mouth. And I remember this because they would treat it with this violet tasting stuff that they would put in my mouth for the sores, and can't stand the taste of violet. I still remember it to this day. But yeah, she would visit him in the house, in the jail, and take him supplies, and so that I could see him. So I don't have a lot of memories of that. I remember that.
Yeah, but your family did end up coming to Florida, which has been your home since. Obviously, many Cuban exiles came to the state, but your father stayed engaged in the politics. And I just wondered, growing up as a small child, what sense you had of what was going on with your family and how it affected you?
Well, what happened was my father came on the ferry once he was released from jail in Cuba. He tried to find a job. He tried to look for a job, and they were blacklisted, his entire family. He also knew a lot of information about Castro because of his father being in the army. And so he told my mother, I have to get you and Glorita out of Cuba. And my mother didn't want to go. She says, I'm not leaving without you. He goes, I'm going to go first and set us up. So he went on the ferry to Key West. He found an apartment. And then my mother and I flew on Pan Am Airlines, her and I. They only let us take one suitcase. They ripped up her PhD in education at the airport because they told her, no, you're not taking your education, which is really an inane comment, because your education isn't a piece of paper. It's an experience and, an intellect and whatnot. But well, they thought that they were doing her harm there. It did cost her in the long run. She had to go back to school here and revalidate her teaching credentials. So, but then he brought us here. We lived with my aunt, who had also left Cuba for a few weeks. Then we found an apartment that my mother found. And immediately upon moving in, my father disappeared. He left a note to my mother and told her, you're going to be receiving $150 a month from the US government. Here's the number for a doctor. I can't tell you where I'm going, but please, take care of Glorita. I can't give you any more details. We now know he had gone to train in Guatemala. The US Army trained them with top of the line equipment. And when they finally got to Cuba, the equipment that they actually sent was broken down. It was nothing of what they had been expecting. They didn't deliver the munitions that were necessary. They literally left them on the banks of Bay of Pigs, and all the air support and everything that they were expecting from the Americans didn't materialize. So my father was the head of the tanks division. He was jailed immediately there. And my mother only found out that something was going on the night before the invasion. He came to the house and he told her that he would be leaving again and that he didn't know what was going to happen. He couldn't tell her where he was going. We saw him a few months after he had disappeared because he was training. And then his birthday was April 17th. His birthday was the day of the Bay of Pigs invasion. So my father, I believe, was turning 27 on the day of the invasion. And the 2 days before, he had come to the house and said goodbye to my mother. So all of a sudden, my mother, we see on the news this thing happen. We don't hear from him. And it wasn't until we saw on television when Cuba posted the videos of the men that they had arrested and had in custody that my mom found out that my dad had been arrested in Cuba after the invasion. Days later, he had been in hiding. They had killed his captain inside the tank, and he had to have the turret was broken. So he had his dead captain with him for 4 days in that
How long
tank.
till he was released and came back home?
2 years. He was a political prisoner in Cuba for 2 years, and he came with the exchange that Kennedy made for trucks and medicines to Cuba. They let out, not all of them, but they let out quite a few of the men that were in the Bay of Pigs invasion. And that was, but my mother, she would drag me from rosary to church to praying for all our men. And then she had moved in all her friends into these 2 little strips of apartments that she had found brand new. So I was raised kind of like in a commune. It was only women. And all the women had their men in jail in Cuba, and they all had kids more or less my age. And we bought one car that cost $50, an old car. Only one of them could drive, so they would pile us all in, all the kids in, and go do groceries together or go do laundry together. And we're really an amazing support system for each other. And my mom would have me sing and recite poetry for them as entertainment at the time.
Because you had, you know, it was a tough life. You worked hard too in those years. And one thing that I was really surprised to hear was that you have this very strong memory of, I think it was being with your mom in the car and hearing Ferry Cross the Mersey.
Absolutely.
In the pacemakers, and it setting something off in you, which I think a lot of British listeners would be surprised. What was it about that moment?
I'll tell you what happened. I mean, my mom's record collection was my first introduction to music. So she not only had Celia Cruz, Cachao, all the big greats of Cuba, but she also had Nat King Cole, Dean Martin, Andy Williams, Johnny Mathis, and Carmen Miranda from Brazil. Later on, Jobim, you know, these amazing, the big Brazilian wave. So that was the first thing I listened to. But when my father came back from Bay of Pigs, he joined the U.S. Army. He went into training for 6 months, and we were stationed then in San Antonio, Texas, at Fort Sam Houston. He was doing intensive English. He went in as an officer. So I remember my sister was born in '63. My father actually met President Kennedy when he came to Texas right before he was assassinated. And he thanked him for what he had done to get them out of Cuba. But in any case, I was driving up to a laundromat with my mom, and the radio was on, and I hear this song come on, and my hair stood on end on my arms. I still remember sitting mesmerized, and I wouldn't get out of the car. My mom said, let's go. I go, Mom, let me finish this song. And I stayed in the car, and the smell of laundromat was coming in through the window. And to this day, whenever I hear that song, I smell laundromat. I have an olfactory memory that's crazy. But that song moved me deeply. And only in retrospect did I realize that it's a bolero. At the time, British bands were really exploring and experimenting with Latin music. And if you listen, it's got the bongos and this Latin beat. So even though the song is Ferry Cross the Mersey by Jerry and the Pacemakers, what spoke to me was that I heard this, you know, British accent singing, and then what was comfortable to me and what I recognized as Latin music. And later, years later, at the Princess Trust dinner, we bought the Beatles' first microphone. We snatched it out of Phil Collins' little hands, bought it from George Martin. And the first thing they recorded on that album, on that mic, had been Bésame Mucho as a demo for EMI. So they were listening to Latin music back then, just like they were listening.
Yeah.
Just like they were listening to Chuck Berry and Elvis. And they were enamored of this sound, and that sound was home to me. So I think that that's what really made that song be such a big impact on me at that moment. I was 6.
And you told me, you know, you were singing from the start. What's really struck me, I was really listening to a lot of your music from, you know, going right back to the 70s. Your voice was always strong. It was always pure. And even now, it seems entirely unchanged. Did you have to work on it, to develop it, to maintain it?
Absolutely. And, you know, I couldn't afford music lessons or voice lessons. My mom couldn't afford it. When we were in South Carolina, a couple years after Texas, we were stationed in Fort Jackson. And one of my dad's troops was a young man that was famous in Cuba. His whole family, they had a TV show, and he was a young child on the show, but now he was in his 20s. So I told my dad, I want to learn guitar, Dad. I really want, you know, somebody to teach me the guitar. So he spoke to this man, Rolando Ochoa, who had a famous family in Cuba, and he started teaching me how to play chords so I could accompany myself on, you know, on the guitar. So, but he was charging nothing. He was just happy to be able to do something other than be in the Army. Later on, I learned classical guitar for my dad because he really wanted me to learn that. When he was in Vietnam, he later went to Vietnam, I was studying classical guitar. but we couldn't afford voice lessons or wouldn't have known where to look for that. It wasn't until I was already in the band, married, and had my son that I started investing, because it really is a very valuable investment for any singer, any musician. When your instrument is your body, you know, I had a lot of bad habits to break because I sang emotionally since I was a child. I didn't know the right technique or where to position your voice, but always wanting to do things better. Just like at the University of Miami, I was studying psychology, communications, a French minor. I just studied I studied makeup as well, because I go, okay, now you're in this band, you got to look okay. So I also know how to aid you, do bruises, do horror makeup, because it was a full course. And I like to be resourceful. I like to be able to do anything I want to do without having somebody else do it for me. So I found an Italian teacher, Gina Moretta, who started teaching me the right technique. And thank the Lord, because you can ruin your voice. I had an 18-piece band behind me. It was super loud on stage. And if I didn't have these tools, and I've continued to study through my life, all this time that people said I came back, I didn't come back from anywhere. I've been here just doing a lot of other things, but continuing to hone my skills. I think it's important to continue to learn and evolve and grow.
But from a very young age, you were performing. So when you went to university, you were performing at weekends. And
Yes.
you'd already met your husband by then, hadn't you? Tell me about how you met Emilio and how quickly you became this unit as performers as well as partners.
It's kismet, like anything else, I believe. I believe that destiny throws some things in your path. Of course, we are free whether we choose to follow that path or totally flip it on its ear. I sang at the folk masses because my friends in high school would always make me sing. They loved my voice. You know, if there was ever, I went to an all-girl Catholic high school. My best friend, they'd make me bring my guitar and sing in the shows. And I was dying because I really don't like being the center of attention. I had to get used to that part. So we had a brother school because it was an all-girls school. And in that brother school, one of my friends, the guy, we would play in the folk masses together. And he was a year ahead of me. He said, look, I want to put together a band for one day for our parents for this religious encounter. They were coming back because I want you to be the singer. My dad works at Bacardi. He invited this guy to come over that has his own band, Miami Latin Boys, to give us some pointers on how to do this. So of course I was dying. I'm sitting there on the floor. My friend was at his guitar. There was a piano player, a flute player girl there. And there's a knock at the door. And I'm sitting on the floor. So my first view is a pair of really nice legs in a pair of shorts and an accordion, which made it look like he was naked, quite honestly, because the accordion covered the shorts. So I'm going like, oh, what's this? All right. So in walks Emilio. At the time, he only had a mustache. And I see him. He seemed like a big man to me, although he's only 4.5 years older than me. So I was 17 right there. So he was 22, because this was May. He had just turned 22. He gave us the pointers. He heard me sing. He left. We did the gig. Everybody went their separate ways. I already had 2 jobs because college work study, since I'm French minor, I was working as an interpreter at the airport in customs and immigration for French, Spanish, and English. That job was every day, 6 days a week, from 1 in the afternoon to 9 at night. Then from 9:30 to 11:30, 2 nights a week, I taught community school guitar. And I was about to start school going from 8 in the morning to noon. So I was swamped. And my mom tried to drag me to a wedding that summer of one of my dad's army buddy's daughter that I grew up with in South Carolina. I tried to bail on it and say, Mom, no, I'm too busy with it. But then she guilted me into it. Your father can't go. He's ill. You need to represent, Cuban guilt. That's big. So I went. And I remember we were always late to everything. So we missed the ceremony at the church. We're walking into the reception, and I look, and to me, I had never gone anywhere. I took care of my dad the whole time. I didn't date anyone. I never had a social life. So I walk into this magical room all decorated for the wedding, and there's a band playing, and they're playing Do the Hustle on the accordion, the guy. I'm going like, whoa, that's brave. but it was like this charisma that they had and this happiness. And I was overwhelmed with that feeling, right? So we run into each other in a doorway and I go, he says, "You're that girl, aren't you? I remember you." I go, "Yeah, I remember you too. You came to Rafael's house, my friend." So he says, "Why don't you sit in with the band? You know, we don't have a singer." I go, "Oh my God." And my mother, who was sitting there listening in, goes, "Yes, sing, please." I found two songs that we both knew, Cuban standards. I sang, I got a standing ovation. They knew me my whole life, these people. They had been listening to me sing since I was a girl. But with that band behind me, it was magical to me too, and clutching the mic stand like I'm gonna die. And that night he asked me to join the band and I said, no. I go, "Listen, I can't. My mom will kill me, first of all. And secondly, I've got two jobs. I'm starting school. I can't." So then 2 weeks later, he tracked me down. He called the people. He found my number. He called my house. My sister picked up and she says, "It's that boy." So I talked to him and I really wanted to do it. I really wanted to so bad. And he said, "Look, come to my apartment. We have rehearsal. Bring whoever you want to bring." I brought my mother, my sister, and my grandma. And I remember being up against the wall of the apartment, like with a crowded, tiny apartment with a 9-piece band and everybody in the courtyard dancing. Again, another magical moment because they had no choice. The band was rehearsing. It's either dance and party or not sleep. And I joined the band for fun. That's it. Just
Miami Sound Machine.
It became Miami Sound Machine later on when we did our first recording in 1976. By the time he realized that we weren't just boys anymore, he was my boss for a year. And Emilio wanted to do an original album. So he was getting ready to go into the studio. And another musician friend of ours, who ended up being the best man at our wedding, he had another band. He said, "Look, there's a small local company. They're interested in signing you. Why don't you do the album with them?" Emilio invited me to write. And I said, "Look, I've done parodies and poems. I think I could write music." I did. We recorded our album in a very short time because we didn't have a budget really. And got it on the radio in South America. So all of a sudden, a year or so later, we were going to do a stadium with like 50,000 people in Latin America and then a wedding in Miami for 200 people because they weren't playing our music.
Yeah, I've got to ask about this because not many acts have that, where you're a huge stadium-filling super band across Latin America, but you hadn't yet broken through in the US. Did it affect how you performed in that strange period before you broke through in America?
Every performance I did affected how I performed, and I tried to grow with each one. And what it did is give me a very clear picture on fame, because it's something that's relative. It's given to you. It's not anything that you hold intrinsically. It's something that can be given and taken away. So it was really useful to me to go over there and you're this huge star and then come back here and you're playing a wedding. So it really keeps your feet on the ground. And I loved every minute of it. I loved the wedding just as much as I loved the 50,000 people, watching and cheering. And it just made us continue to want to grow and evolve and get our music to other places. And it gave me the opportunity to grow slowly and to get comfortable in my own skin and just relax and let people see how music felt to me.
Like so many people, my memory of the 80s is defined by you and Miami Sound Machine and the joy of your songs, the joy of those videos, which in England in the 80s, it was so exciting and glamorous, this sense of this exciting culture that you were part of. When fame did come, global fame, how did you feel? And did it always feel that you were in control of it?
We never focused on it, honestly. The fame part was the last thing that I ever thought about. I didn't read my own press because undoubtedly I had a different feeling when I would finish an interview, and when at the beginning I would read what they wrote, I'd go like, what? I remember that in England at the beginning, they thought I was too nice. I was just being myself, and the press was almost saying that I was too nice, that it couldn't be real and I'm going like, what? And at that point I made a decision. I said, you know what? I'm going to do what I do and I'm not going to read about it, because I'd rather take the feeling that I had when we did the interview than see a third person's opinion or view. And regardless, you know, reviews on your music, there's always going to be somebody that loves it and somebody that doesn't. And I want to continue to do what I do, and I'm human. It hurts you. It like, it frustrates you. So I thought, you know what? I'm not gonna focus on that. We would just focus on producing the music we loved, writing, the excitement of preparing the shows, making the shows bigger and better than ever, growing in that way. Emilio stopped performing so he could be more in control and help me by being in charge of lighting and sound. And I could feel comfortable up there knowing that there was somebody in the front taking care of that. So his ego wasn't a problem, because sometimes in this world, egos get you in trouble. That they really do. I mean, you need to have an ego. Everybody has one. But when it starts being detrimental, or you just think about you being like above and beyond everything else, that's a big trap. So we've always been a team, Emilio and I. And yeah, he was my boss for a year. We both didn't want to go down that road and have it ruin everything on the professional level. But it was inevitable. We fell in love slowly, and then we dated for 2 years before we got married. So I knew him well before I made that commitment. And he just, you know, we've evolved and grown. I've been there for him. He's been there for me. We're really a team, and that's important. Yeah. So I was blessed.
It is just amazing that you are such a strong unit still. Can I ask you about the songwriting? Because one of the things that really is striking is how prolific you have been and the quality of your songwriting. And I wonder if, relatively briefly, you could give us an insight into how you write. Has it evolved?
I wish I could tell you a formula. There's two ways, in my estimation, of writing a song. There's inspiration, and these songs I feel come through me rather than from me. There are certain channels, and most of my songs I've written between midnight and 6 in the morning, when my family's asleep, when the phones aren't ringing, and when the airwaves, like the vibe waves, are quieter on my side of the world. So that's when I've felt more inspiration, and that's when I feel like I can really, you know, some songs have been written 15 minutes. Anything for You, Coming Out of the Dark, they've come through me, like I said. Other ones you learn and you craft, and you can always be better. And Emilio has this uncanny like talent of finding the one word in a song that I'm unsure about. And when I sing it to him, he'll go, wow, that's a great song, but I don't know about that word or that line. And I'm going, no, I get upset about it, because I knew it was already iffy in my mind. And it always brings you to a better product. So, you know, I wrote poetry since I was a child. I did parodies of songs because humor is a big deal for me. And all that was really songwriting. And, you know, the fact that Emilio asked me to do it, and I just tried. And since it was so tied to my emotions, and it's such a private and wonderful thing music has always been for me, it became my way of expressing emotion, because I tried to keep myself very strong for my mom while my dad was ill. So I think that all those bottled up feelings, I tell my daughter all the time, I tell her, listen to me. It is much more inspiration. Pain is more easy to write through than happiness. We connect more on a very deep emotional level when we're going through sadness or difficulty or pain. Yeah. And people can identify that. They know you're honest, because when they feel those things, you can't BS that. You can't make it up. You can't fake it. So people will know if something is honest without knowing why. They know, but they know it gets on the music. And that's what it's been. It's been my expression of emotion for my whole life, and thoughts and musings and analysis, and I pour it into my music.
One of the things I remember so well, it's one of those moments where I know exactly where I was when I was. And I was in a car on my way to school because of the time difference. The news broke overnight. Was when I heard about the road crash in which your coach, you were touring. It was 1990. It was kind of peak of your fame. And you were involved in a road accident, and you know your back was broken, and it was terrible. I remember how scared we all were. I don't know how you feel speaking about it. Do you remember the accident itself still?
Every minute. I kept praying to faint and I wouldn't. But I took a lot of hope in the amount of pain that I was in, because since I knew so much about the spine and the workings of the human body because of what I'd gone through with my dad. He came back from Vietnam with Agent Orange poisoning, and they said he had MS, multiple sclerosis, but he had so many symptoms that had nothing to do with that. It was triggered by this Agent Orange poisoning. So I knew, and I knew that if I was feeling pain that I hadn't severed the cord. But funny enough, we all have this, but I've always had a kind of psychic thing where I get these flashes that just come into my mind as a certainty, and they happen. And some of them I've shared a lot with Emilio, and they've all come true. Everything that I've told him that has been a big, like, impactful message that I've received has come true. And when we moved into our house here in 1988, that the money had rolled in from Dr. Bede, we waited till we could really afford a house, so that, we're very careful the way we spend money, that immigrant mentality. But I had him put an elevator in the house, and he said to me, "We only have one floor. What? And it's a tiny elevator." I go, "Yeah, but we travel a lot. We're going to need it for suitcases, maybe for people that help. It'd be easier for people to bring things up and down." But I knew in the back of my mind that I was going to need that elevator one day for something important. And Emilio and I would always, he's very competitive, so we'd chase each other up the stairs to see, always, like idiots, and we were playing like kids, running up the stairs. And I would get a flash in my brain that would tell me, one day you're not going to be able to do this. But then I'd get another flash that would say, but it's going to be okay. So cut to that day on the bus, needless to say, having a father in a wheelchair, that was one of my big fears too. We feel this explosion. I had just woken up from a nap. I thought we had arrived at the concert venue, and we had stopped because there was an accident 7 miles ahead of us and all the traffic was backed up. I opened my eyes and boom, it felt like a crash. I thought momentarily we had just met the president at the White House. I thought maybe somebody had put a bomb on the bus because they weren't happy about it. I don't know what I thought, but I opened my eyes on the floor of the bus, looking up. The front of the bus had been torn away. It was snowing inside the bus, which ended up being a blessing, because now the first thing you do to a victim of a spinal cord injury is put them on ice. So nature, without this being known yet at that time, put me on ice. Emilio was on top of me bleeding like profusely. I tried to get up and I couldn't get up from the floor of the bus. I had a metallic taste in my mouth. I felt around my back to see if something was coming out, like if some bone or there was blood. Fortunately, that hadn't happened. But I knew in that instant that I'd broken my back. And I told Emilio, I go, "Babe, I think I broke my back." And he goes, no, maybe you dislocated. I go, "Find the baby." Because at this point, all I'm thinking is my son had been in the back of the bus. Fortunately, he had gotten up to get some candy out of his bunk, and the whole back was crushed. So he was under everything that had fallen in the center of the bus in the dark. When Emilio brought him and sat him next to me, I was looking at him. He didn't seem injured, but he looked like he was going to go into shock. He kept saying, "Mommy, please get up, please get up." And I couldn't. So I held his hand and I told him, "Look, I can't get up right now, but hold my hand. You make me feel better." I picked a point on the roof of the bus and started doing my Lamaze breathing to try to be able to withstand the pain. And at the same time thinking, at least I have pain. There was a nurse behind us in a car. She found her way around the doorway. We almost went over an embankment. And she said, "I'm a nurse. Can I help you?" And I said, "I think I broke my back." And I was grabbing my legs and lifting them up because it would alleviate a little bit, because 2 vertebrae had been pushed in and exploded, and my spine was literally resting on a sliver of bone, and I was numb but in pain. And she held my head for an hour and a half until the paramedics got there. She put my head in her lap and said, "Don't move. You cannot move."
And in the end, you had all this surgery, but you defied all the doctor's predictions. You were back in a year, I think, weren't you?
20 days shy of a year. On March 1st, 1991, I stepped back on stage in Miami. That wasn't my plan. All I cared about was walking. But then 6 months after my accident, when I saw my body coming back, I thought, you know what? Maybe this is the whole reason that I became famous.
How did it
Maybe I
change
have,
you performing and living your life after that?
oh my God, they make so much gratitude, discipline I never knew I had in me. I found I did it so the fans could see that we all go through things, but it depends on how you deal with what happens to you that can make all the difference. So I fought extra hard to get back on that stage because I wanted them to see that we have an amazing power to heal, and we have an amazing power over our own bodies and lives. And I thought maybe that's the point I became famous. That wasn't my plan. I just loved music. So it gave me a real, like a goal to get back out there and be there for people and show them, hey, we all go through stuff, it doesn't matter who you are. We were at the peak of my fame, and because of that peak, I received so much prayer from around the world. That's another thing I learned, the power of prayer. I mean, I used to pray a lot. I was raised Catholic, but I didn't have really a real connection with it. And it wasn't until I felt people's prayers, like an energy around me, like a physical energy, that like I had plugged in to the world, and I channeled it in, and I meditated, and I used it in my recuperation, imagine nerves, reconnecting. And my doctor also was a scientist, but when he gave me all the bad news, he said, I also tell you it's up to you, because I've seen a lot of things that I can't explain with science. His wife had overcome Hodgkin's, and she lived another 15 years and was able to raise their son, even though she ultimately died of it. But he gave me like hope also. And I said, if it's up to me, then I'm coming back.
Amazing. I'm conscious of the time we have left. I wanted to look at the music you've recorded since, and there's two albums that I want to pick out. One is, you once said your 1993 album, Mi Tierra, was your favorite. It's a Spanish language album. It's about a kind of sense of Cuba before Castro. What would you say is your relationship with Cuba now? Do you still see yourself as an exile? And what would it take to go back?
Absolutely, I'm an exile. Besides the fact that that's the description in anything I've ever read, Cuba's very strong in my heart and mind, because my mother made it a point that we deeply know our roots, our traditions, our culture. First, because she thought we were going back. I have a round trip ticket in my, safe deposit box, Pan Am Airlines. Yes. And then when she saw that that wasn't going to happen, it became even more important. We spoke only Spanish at home. I learned English when I went to school. I sang all those songs, those old songs, for my mom and my grandmother. So when we came up with the concept of Mi Tierra, I knew how those words were used. I knew what vocabulary. Latins use a lot of double entendre. There's a lot of sex talked about, but underneath the words, it's always subtext, because so it's very sexy, it's beautiful, and I knew how these things were shaped. So we worked for 5 years on that album, and we released it at the peak. They thought we were crazy to take a risk like that when we were at the top of the pop charts. And I would always say, this is exactly why I want to do it right now, because there's going to be an interest of my fans to learn more about where I came from and where this sound came from. So for my kids and my grandson, that became so important to salvage part of our culture musically through that album. And that's why I'm so proud of what it did worldwide and continues to.
The newest album, Brazil 305, revisits some of your old hits through this amazing Brazilian prism of its unique rhythms and sounds. And I hadn't known that you'd had this lifelong fascination with Brazilian music.
Yes. My mom, again, her Carmen Miranda records, later her Jobim albums that she would relish and love, Elis Regina. And I got to interview her daughter, Maria Rita, in Brazil, because we shot a documentary that is going to accompany this record early next year about the roots of samba. In the first album that we recorded, I recorded a song called Malvina, a Brazilian hit we did in Spanish. In '83, we did an album called Rio, where I wrote Spanish lyrics to huge Brazilian hits of the time. So I have always, and live, we would do samba versions of Live for Loving You. My fans that have been, they've heard this, me do this before. So when the idea from Afobere, the head of Sony, came, knowing my love of this music, and he said, what would you think about this, going to Brazil, using arrangers and Brazilian musicians? I go, oh, I love it. I want to do a couple new tracks, though. And he said, absolutely, which is why we did Cuando Hay Amor and a few other of the original tracks on the record. But it's my homage to music that has fulfilled me and that is so incredibly complex and syncopated and sensual and beautiful, and shares deep African roots with the music of Cuba. Because the Yoruba tribe went to both places.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was rewatching the original video to The Rhythm Is Going to Get You, where you
yes,
painting and the drums, and it so obviously is drawing on those African connections. And you've always, from so early on, proudly drawn out the African in Cuban culture, as well as now in Brazilian culture.
Absolutely. That same tribe went both, well, didn't go. They were enslaved and taken to Salvador de Bahia, Brazil, and in Cuba. In Cuba, we had the French, British, and then Spanish influences. It got mixed with the African roots. Danzón is French court music with African rhythms. So all the rhythms out of Cuba have very deep African roots from this Yoruba tribe. And early on in our career, Emilio and I played at what they called bembes, which were Afro-Cuban religious ceremonies. It's not my religion, but we performed in these parties. So we knew all these rhythms and we fused them together. So and then in Brazil, they mixed with the Portuguese. So they got a totally different flavor, but at its core is Africa through and through, as it is through Latin America, those deep African roots.
I'm going to take audience questions very shortly. I have one other question I wanted to ask. You're launching your own online chat show with your family, aren't you? That's going to start in October.
Oh, yes. We're going to do Red Table Talks. It's an offshoot of Jada Pinkett Smith, eponymous series that she started, whole new genre. It'll be Red Table Talk, the Estefans. It's my daughter, my niece, Lily, who's an Emmy-winning TV personality for 30 years on Latin television, and me, discussing topics that are, really important to our times, to women, to families, and, Latinos have a tough time discussing some of these things. So we're going to be honest and as natural and bare as Jada has been in our own way, and we're starting recording it. Hopefully this will come out in October.
Excellent. Right, I've got some questions coming in now. So this is from Ian. From all of the songs you have written, which one resonates most with you today?
Oh, Lordy. That's an impossible question, because they all mean something different and they all have such special meaning. But I think Con los años que me quedan was the first one I wrote with Emilio, together with him. So that's always going to be, and it's become an amazing wedding song. But I mean, I love all of them. They all mean something very special to me.
Excellent. Ingrid from Berlin asks, is there any news about the movie of On Your Feet, the musical? Is the script finished? When will the shooting start?
Oh my gosh, Ingrid, you ask the perfect question. This is moving forward. We will make an announcement when there's something to announce. But yeah, it's, COVID put the kibosh on a lot of things. So we're just waiting, but that's definitely still in the works.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. What do you think about reality show competitions like American Idol or X Factor? Are they great opportunities for talent to come out now? Or are you worried about their effect? Are the artificial ways to make
them? You know what? Hats off to them. I would die in that situation. I would be horrible. I'd be voted off I don't know. Competition in music to me is a really tough angle, because I love many different people. Why should I love one more than the next? I don't like, the thing I like least about sports is that somebody has to lose. So that's the only thing about reality. But yeah, it gives opportunity for people that may not get the opportunity to show people their talent, and hats off, because to be able to put up with that kind of stress is really, really difficult. I admire them very much.
A question about Cuba. We've talked a bit about your feelings about it as an exile. And the question's coming saying, what would it take for you to play there? Am I right in thinking the Pope John Paul II, did ask you to accompany him on a visit, but you didn't feel you could go?
He did ask me. It was going to turn a beautiful spiritual mission into a political one, because I wasn't going to stay quietly by and not say the things that I've said worldwide, that I don't agree with this dictatorship that has been in Cuba. I think it's the longest running dictatorship at this moment right now. Even though Fidel's gone, his family is still very much in control. I would want Cuba to be free to choose who they want in power, free to join the world, free to travel wherever they want to go, which they can't, free to choose their careers and not be told what to study, just free to speak their minds, even if they disagree. And, who knows at this point if I'll ever get that opportunity, but that would be what I would want in order to celebrate with them their freedom.
Now, it's no secret that we're speaking a few months before a presidential election. Emilio recorded a song called We're All Mexicans in 2015 when, as a presidential candidate, Donald Trump was attacking Mexican immigrants. You performed on the record. Ali Borhani is asking, how do you feel about the very negative stigma and sentiment that President Trump and his administration have created around immigrants at large, and particularly around Latino people?
You know what? I wish that it was only President Trump that has done this, but I have lived long enough to live through several campaigns, and every time there's a political campaign, the last one in the country, it gets attacked, the fear mongering starts, the division gets exacerbated, because that's how people control our minds and votes. And I've always stayed out. I've never publicly supported a candidate. I'm not Democrat, I'm not a Republican. Quite honestly, my personal view is that parties are outdated. I would like to see a common sense party, which, by the way, is not that common. It should be called uncommon sense, because it's like, I would love to see a party that really addresses the majority of people, which are a balance and are in the middle and are supportive of all the things we have to do for each other, education, healthcare. And neither one of the parties to me really, has that. It's very depressing when I see how kind of all standards have been lowered. I used to think as a kid that people in position of power knew what they were doing, that at least if they got to that, it meant that they had some kind of skill level or had something that they knew more than me. Hello, people, they don't. They're not any better than all of us. We're flying by the seat of our pants, and it's up to all of us to participate in who we want to see leading our countries all over the world, to be present, to stay, focused and to vote because we can. I've been taking my kids to vote with me since they were little, so they knew the importance of this. I would always do my homework, look up the candidates, read about what they've done. And that's what we got to do, everybody. Let's really analyze in this election coming up. Think about what you want, what future, what example do you want for your kids at the head, at the highest seat of our country. And, that's what we need to focus on.
You're quite right in saying that you have stayed apolitical. But I'm thinking about, you've spoken at the United Nations, you've done a lot of fundraising for survivors of hurricanes in Haiti and Puerto Rico. Have you ever thought about going into politics or a more formal life?
God, no. To me, I think I have a lot more power to do good and to make change from the private sector. The minute you get involved in politics, it's a machine that chews you up and spits you out. And you know what? Thank you that somebody at least puts themselves under that kind of scrutiny and craziness to try to, lead a country or a nation or whatever. But it's a machine that has very, tentacles. And I would not want to get involved in anything of that nature. I would try to hope that they try to elevate, the rhetoric and try to really think about what's good for the people that they're leading. And politics is a tough animal. I really don't, it's something that my music away from politics. That's why you're never going to hear it in there.
Well, my second question follows on then from what you've just said. You have won many awards, including the US Medal of Freedom by President Obama. You were the first married couple, together with your husband, to receive the medal.
Yes, that was quite a day.
And you were the first Cuban American to receive a Kennedy Center honor, which is given for outstanding lifetime contribution to American culture. And I wonder what honors like that do mean to you, because I think they do mean something to you, being honored for your
Yes.
contribution to culture.
You know, to receive the highest honor that is bestowed on a citizen, on a civilian, from, you know, the presidency, from the government, from Congress, for example, Library of Congress, that chose rhythm is going to get you as one of only 500 songs to be protected from a nuclear blast. I don't know who is going to care about listening to music after a nuclear blast, but needless to say, because supposedly it changed the cultural fabric of this nation. As an immigrant, I know my father was smiling from heaven that day. My mother got to see us receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and we were incredibly honored, and Emilio and I, to be the first couple to receive it. It was really special, and it was one of those moments that we will remember forever. And accolades are nice, they're wonderful, but that's never been the reason we've done anything in our life. So things like that are very meaningful, and also for us as Cuban Americans and as exiles.
I was reading a list of things that you cherish, and one of them was like your Pan Am return ticket to Cuba that you've never yet used. But you also
Yes.
cited PBS, the American Public Broadcasting Service, as a really important influence. And I know you've been on Sesame Street and you raised your kids watching it. I'm fascinated by why that show and PBS is so important to you.
Well, first, it's public television, so it was really kept, it's been kept alive by the viewers, by the people that watch it. Not so much, you know, of course they need advertisers and whatnot, but they've always had, they've got an elevated sense of what they put on the show. They do documentaries that are incredibly interesting. They focused on children's programming early on. And I watched Sesame Street when I was a kid, and my sister along with me, because she was 6 years younger. My son learned to read from it because he was 2 years old, and we'd going down the street, he'd point to a stop sign and say stop, and then yield. And I'm going, wait a minute, where? And he learned from watching Sesame Street. And they've always tried to teach, educate, elevate, do things that, you know, are good for us. So I really do appreciate their contributions. And throughout my life, they've taken on different roles. You know, I did the standards on PBS. I love their programming. I think it's just a really wonderful thing to have.
I'm going to read some of the comments that have come in from audience, and I have a final question to wrap with you. Robert Abbott says, your fans love your introspective side, Unwrap/Destiny. Any plans to record more music like that down the line? I don't know if you have a brief answer.
Listen, I would love nothing more than to do that. I did it in a little snippet during COVID when I wrote We Needed Time. That came from a conversation with my son, and that's inspiration. That's one of the, I hung up the phone. I told him, he literally said to me, Mom, you know, this has been tough, but it gave me time to catch up. And something hit me. And I said to him, there's a song in there somewhere. And he said, write it, Mom. I hung up the phone and I started writing immediately. And by the end of the day, I had written that song. I recorded it. I went out on my boat and shot a video, and I put it out there as a gift to my fans. So I did, in a kind of little small way, I gave it as a gift. You know, that's what a musician does. We try to translate the things that we're living and experiencing as humans into writing or art or painting or music. So I've been doing it. Like, would I love to? Yes, I would, absolutely. You know, there's so many things. I'd love to do another Christmas album. I'd love to do a Spanish standards. I'd love to do a part 2 of the standards, but all up tempo, and call it the double standard. It's like, you know,
I'm writing these down, and we're going to hold
I would love it, but you know what? It takes time, and so much time. Yeah.
Well, you've got time. I have a final question, which is about the Gloria Estefan who might have been, which is the Gloria Estefan who worked as a translator at the airport and could have been a spy for the CIA.
Yeah.
What happened?
Hey, who knows?
You got approached.
I did, very much, because they had been observing me in customs. They're undercover there. I didn't know that, but they were observing me. They wanted me to be a supervisor. They had already offered me the supervisor role in my job. I already joined the band, so I was kind of heading in a different direction. But I was very honored that they considered that, and they approached me. They wanted me to join, and I was all about it. I was so excited when I came and told my mom. She had the biggest fit that I had seen her have. She goes, your father already gave his life for 2 countries. How could you tell me you're going to live your life? How am I going to be able to live the rest of my life worrying about you? So Cuban mom comes through. Although I would really bug her in her later years, and my sister, and go, well, you two really don't know if I did join, do you? Because I have the perfect cover. I
Oh,
meet
what
all of
cover?
these heads of state. I go, start playing my music backwards. Maybe you'll get, maybe I was sending messages, you know, through my music. Yeah, no. But I had decided to go, I'd been accepted to Sorbonne, and I was going to study international law and diplomacy in French. And that would have been a career that I would have loved, diplomacy. I do it every day in my life. I did it with my band, my musicians, with our employees, with my family, with my husband, with my kids, with my dogs. Still diplomatic every sense of the way.
Definitely. Oh, Gloria Estefan, the many Gloria Estefans who exist within one person. It has been an absolute honor and a privilege to be welcomed into your home and for you to speak so honestly about your life, the role of your remarkable family who clearly shaped you, and all your ongoing work, and the joy in your new album. It's something I think a lot of us are feeling is particularly welcome as the world is coping with the horrors of
Oh
the
my
pandemic.
gosh. Thank you so much. It means so much to me to have this platform and to thank everybody, because everybody, thank you so much for decades of love and support. And the many Glorias, hey, there's many of all of us. We have amazing ways to be able to do whatever it is we want, and you put work and discipline into. So whatever you dream about, hey, it's yours for the taking. It's hard work. It's not going to land in your lap. So thank you all for making my dreams come true by listening to my musings, musical musings, and I hope you feel the joy and love that I put into this album.
Well, I'd like to thank as well everyone from all around the world for attending, and you can subscribe to Intelligence Squared Plus online to gain access to all of our digital events. Just go to intelligencesquared.com/plus. But Gloria Estefan, thank you again for coming on How I Found My Voice.
Thank you, Samira. Stay healthy and safe. You and everybody you love, and everybody out there, stay healthy and safe, please.
Bye. Thank you all.